Denise Bolser was a 24-year-old bookkeeper who lived with her husband in Raymond, New Hampshire. On January 17, 1985, she dropped her husband off for work in Manchester and drove back to her home in her husband's truck as her car was in the shop for repairs. Later that day, when her husband returned home, he found footprints in the snow, and when we went inside the house, he found a terrifying note on the fridge which read, "We've got your wife. Don't call the police or you won't see her again." He waited for 6 hours, but when she did not return back home, and he didn't receive any communications from the supposed hostage takers, he notified the police. Investigators found no signs of forced entry or any sign of a struggle. Her husband said his pickup that Denise was using was also missing. Police found out that Denise was scheduled for work that day, but she never showed up. Police waited at the house for a potential ransom call, but they never received any communication. A week later, Denise's husband's truck was found abandoned at Logan Airport in Boston. On the front seat of the truck, police found Denise's Social Security card, birth certificate, and credit cards all laid out neatly. However, she was nowhere to be found. There were no suspects in the case, and Denise's husband was never pursued as a person of interest. He later divorced her in absentia. Denise's family believed that Denise was probably kidnapped and possibly even murdered, but there had never been any evidence to support this other than the note. A few months later, the courier service where she worked as a bookkeeper accused her of embezzling an amount between $12,000 to $100,000. Police wondered if Denise had run away in fear. Denise was charged with the crime in absentia in 1986. No new clues or tips would be found, and she remained missing. The case soon grew cold. Time after time, police sent dental records out to investigators in other parts of the country, wondering if this time they would match the remains of some unidentified female corpse, but to no avail. Then, in 2002, police would get a credible lead. Denise was soon tracked down and discovered to be living in Panama City, Florida. She had started a whole new family who had had no idea about her past life. When questioned, Denise explained that she had embezzled around $100,000 and she had to run when her ex-boss had threatened her life. She also said that she had lived previously in South Carolina, the Bahamas, California, and Hawaii in her absence. Denise had no idea that she was wanted for embezzlement, and that this is what eventually brought authorities to her front door. While they eventually located her and she confessed to the theft, authorities had dropped the embezzlement case in 1993, and Denise's ex-boss was long since deceased. Rick Hazelton. In 1986, when he was 23 years old, Rick Hazelton made the drastic decision to leave the community he had known his whole life, Glens Falls, New York, in order to head to New York City. Desiring to make it in the music industry, Rick abandoned all his friends and family without telling them too many details in order to make this desired career jump. His friends, knowing Rick's love of music and his wish to perform in front of the public, supported his decision and bid him farewell. However, this was with the full intention of meeting up with him again in the near future. However, despite having left on good terms, Rick never contacted any of his friends or family ever again. He never wrote, he never called, and even with the advent of the internet, he never emailed or connected with anybody on social media. His absence was painfully felt for more than 33 years. He was eventually declared deceased by his family in order to settle matters of family estate planning. One of his friends, Brian Pynchon, ended up becoming a Fort Edward police officer and dedicated many years of his life to attempting to track down his friend, but to no avail. He even searched the identification notes of countless John Does located throughout the country. Utilizing resources from a detective in Nashville, Tennessee, Brian Pynchon was finally able to track down his long-lost friend, who, although he was missing, was certainly not lost. Rick Hazelton was alive and well and settled in Salem, Oregon, nearly 3,000 miles away from his hometown He had left so long ago. To the shocked friends and family who had grieved his absence, Rick turned out to have created a new life, complete with a wife and 2 children who were not privy to his previous surreptitious disappearance in 1986. But it was Rick who was most shocked that people still even cared enough to look for him. He said, "One day I got a letter in the mail that said, 'You're being investigated in a missing persons report,' and I thought, that can't be right. I'm not missing. This has got to be a mistake," he recalls. He goes on to express his surprise at the outpouring of care and support shown by his friend in the ensuing years. "I didn't think anybody really cared, so I just made my own life and did it." He recalls how strange it felt to make contact with his family again and says, quote, "When I called them, they were like, 'Oh, you're like back from the dead.'" Rick recalls that after leaving the small town life he knew, he tried his hand at performing on the rough streets of New York City. When that didn't work out, he went to Miami, where he eventually bought an inexpensive airplane ticket to Colorado, where he then hitchhiked west. He would meet his eventual wife, marry her, and raise a family. All the while, unbeknownst to Rick, his own family and friends were missing him. He says that after moving to Oregon and living there for the past 20 years, he did not think anyone was still looking for him. After his friend uncovered the truth, the pair exchanged letters and eventually exchanged telephone numbers. Once reconnected over the phone, the Rick and Brian chatted for 3 hours one day and eventually planned a reunion. The reunion took place back in Rick's hometown, where he and his childhood buddies met on the kickball field that they all frequented decades prior. Rick has yet to go into specific detail as to why he chose to drop off the face of the earth, and is vague in his responses when questioned further. Robert Hutton, looking through the pictures and profiles of over 500 dead and unidentified bodies, is not typical older sister behavior, but that is exactly what Edith Hutton found herself doing as her younger brother Robert had vanished in 1972 when she was just 24 years old. The two had been close and had grown up together in Lancaster, California, a tiny town around 70 miles north of Los Angeles. With images of the unknown dead bodies flashing before her eyes, Edith, now in her 60s, strained her eyes in search of a familiar feature, a detail, anything that would help her answer the question of what had happened to her brother so many years prior. It was always the smallest of details that stood out as potentially holding the answer in the photos. Things like a belt buckle that would have been just the style Robert would have worn, facial features that brought back memories of their old childhood photos sometimes lead her to quickly draw in her breath due to its similarities. Out of the hundreds of John Doe profiles, 6 of them had potential to be a match to her brother. She submitted her contact information for all 6, but only heard back from one of the institutions that she reached out to. Her submission had attracted the attention of Detective Jason Moran, posted at a police station located just outside of Chicago, Illinois. Moran's office has previously reopened the John Wayne Gacy case 2 years prior in hopes of identifying his remaining 8 victims. John Wayne Gacy, of course, being the notorious serial killer dubbed the Killer Clown, who assaulted and murdered upwards of 33 young men and boys, although that number is mostly likely much higher. Edith's brother Robert Hutton had gone missing during the period that Gacy held the community in a death vice, and he very much fit the victimology of Gacy. A younger Caucasian male with a lifestyle that kept him unsettled and looking for work in places similar to the construction company Gacy owned. For these reasons, Detective Moran believed that Robert may have been another victim, as his vagabond lifestyle had him on the move from the East Coast to the West Coast of the United States, and he could have been in Chicago at that time that Gacy killed. After graduating high school, Robert Hutton chose to go along with his sister, her new husband, as well as their newborn baby on a cross-country road trip throughout the U.S. Their plan was to live as a group out of their pickup truck they owned and to find temporary work throughout their journey. Once in Colorado, however, Robert decided to break off from the young couple and their baby. He said he would be staying in Colorado and forge his own way. But that was the last time Edith would ever see her brother again, for more than 42 years. In the aftermath of Robert's parting of ways with his sister, their mother made many analog-esque attempts at finding her son. She looked over her old telephone bills, trying to ascertain where past collect calls had originated from. She then would contact the local authorities from the area where the call came from and urge them to look into the case of her missing son, but to no avail. When her mother passed away in 1989, Edith recalls she still believed that Robert was dead. Edith didn't stop looking, however, and utilized the advent and popularization of the internet in the mid-90s to her advantage. Using primitive but semi-successful search engines, Edith wrote down the names and addresses of every person with the name of Robert, Robbie, or Bob Hutton that she could locate. To each of them, she would send handwritten and neatly addressed postcards. She would send more than 400 postcards. The postcards finished their brief message with a polite and heartbreaking endnote. If this is not you, please forgive the intrusion and disregard this card. Which is exactly what all of the recipients did, as Edith never heard back from any of them, and for another decade she searched fruitlessly. It wasn't until the detective responsible for the Gacy victim identifications received Edith's inquiry, dubbed Tip Number 68, that he was able to use police-only databases to look up and find Edith's long-lost brother. Officer Moran was able to find information that led him to Robert's last known location as being Breckenridge, Colorado, and then in Stevensville, Montana. In April of 2021, a police officer from the Ravalli County Sheriff's Office was dispatched to the address at the request of the investigating office. Upon making contact with the intended, the officer put detectives on the phone with the man they once believed dead. Robert Hutton recalls the detective saying to him over the phone, "Well, I guess you're not dead," with Hutton replying back, "No, not the last time I checked." At the end of the call, detectives asked Hutton if he was comfortable with his sister getting his phone number. He said yes. Hearing her brother's voice for the first time in over 4 decades, Edith recalls being emotional and overwhelmed. She recalls that she began her telephone call to him with the casual opener, "Hi bro, this is your sister." She goes on to say, "I emphasized to him that we had never stopped looking for him and still loved him, and that we're here if he wanted us." When asked by ABC News why he was gone for so long, Robert Hutton responded, "Just neglect. And procrastination is my middle name. It just kind of happened that we got out of touch, and then when we tried to get in touch, we had no contact information." He is making up for lost time by talking each week to both his sister and his father, the latter who survived cancer and is still alive to see his son again. They talk usually for as long as an hour at a time. While the crimes of the killer clown would haunt hundreds of those affected, the subsequent investigation did have a silver lining, as in the 17 years since Gacy was finally executed for his brutal and numerous crimes, the remaining case investigations lead to the identities of 4 missing men have being ascertained and therefore have led to 4 more family reunions with people long since believed dead. In addition to the IDs of these 5 men in total, 1 more unknown Gacy victim has also been identified. These stories remind us that even in the darkest mysteries, hope can prevail. Which of these stories moved you the most? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an episode of Criminologist. We'll see you next time for more incredible true stories.